You're listening to The Bird Bath. Welcome back to The Bird Bath. Each week we scrape the surface of the news you need to know, so let's get into it. This week we've got probably one of my favorite things we get to do every year, which is sit down with some of the incredible leadership from Hills and talk about the State of Shelter Pet Adoption Report. They released the 2025 State of Shelter Pet Adoption Report earlier this month, and we grabbed some time on the very busy and very cool Dr. Chelsea Esty, who is the new Chief Veterinary Officer for Hills US, to sit down and talk with us a little bit more about what the report has, what's going into it. So let's jump right into that interview. Dr. Esty, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
I have too. It's I know I reported on when you were new in your job, so it's really cool to be able to have you here. You've got a really impressive background, but we are here to talk about shelter medicine, shelter animals, state of shelter report. So give me some background here. Why does Hills do this every year?
At Hills, supporting the shelter and animal welfare communities has really been woven into our DNA for a long time. We've actually, for 23 years, we've offered one of the largest and longest standing shelter feeding programs. We've provided more than $300 million in food to feed shelter pets, and at this point, we've supported more than 15 million adoptions. But when we stepped back and we thought about it, right, to really make an impact and truly contribute to ending pet homelessness, we needed to understand what's happening. And so our report was created to fill a critical gap in data for our partners in that shelter and in the veterinary community. We wanted to get inside the hearts and the minds of our potential pet parents to understand what are their barriers to adoption, what are their perceptions, and then really importantly, where are those opportunities so we can all work together to improve outcomes for these pets.
That's great. I didn't realize there was that sort of background of it. I know the big impact that you guys have all had, and as a non-DVM, but as a pet parent 2 times over, it was very cool to read through the report. It was extremely digestible, which I appreciated. And there were some really cool findings in there. What were the key findings that you thought were most important in this year's report?
You hit the nail on the head, right? There's a lot of information there, and we really tried to do our best to distill that down and make it approachable. Because one of the biggest takeaways from our report is that the adoption crisis is complex. And probably not surprisingly, we've seen that financial concerns, the overall cost of pet ownership, those are some significant hurdles for nearly half of the people that responded in the survey. But we also uncovered that there were issues like housing restrictions, access to care, and even some misperceptions around shelter pets that proved to be significant challenges that might be holding people back. But while there are those challenges, they're there, they're real, what was really inspiring is that our report also highlighted some big areas of opportunity. And one of the most promising areas was around fostering. So we did find that about 65% of Americans thought that fostering was a positive way to try out pet ownership. But only 1 in 10 Americans actually have fostered in the past. And so we see there's a really big disconnect there, but it shows us there's a clear path forward in an area where we can certainly contribute to making an impact.
I found that really interesting. I have not fostered an animal before. The term that I learned from your report, or that really kind of made me chuckle, was failed fosters.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that one.
Yeah, a failed foster is like the best thing I can think of, right? So as people think about trying to bring a new pet into their home, the idea of fostering and the idea of participating in that was neat. It opened up some new venues in my mind. So that was something I definitely would recommend people to look into it. What do you think, though, are some of the additional challenges for people that do bring that pet home, and whether it's the fostering situation or whether they do a full adoption of that animal? What are the key challenges post-adoption that you guys are helping to tackle?
First, I'll probably hit on some of what are those key benefits when we think about fostering, because I think it kind of gets the heart of that opportunity that we were able to pull from the report. And what's really powerful about fostering is it ends up being a win-win-win for everyone, right? It gets the pets out of the shelter environment, gives them a break from that kennel kind of shelter environment, and that creates space in the shelter, because we know that many of the shelters across the U.S. are reaching a very critical capacity issue. So a foster opportunity creates another opportunity for a pet to potentially come into that particular foster. It also gives us really valuable insights around that pet, right? How do they do in a home environment? How are they doing when they're interacting with other pets? And so we get to take that information back to the shelter to create a more robust story and bio around that pet that might help place them with a potential pet owner in the future. And I think the other benefit is that the person who's fostering gets to sort of try out pet ownership in that way. It gives them some insights into, is pet ownership right for me?
Very cool. How else are people getting that additional support post adoption? What did the report find for us?
That's a really critical point to highlight is in that post-adoption environment, that's a really big opportunity to make sure that we are providing that support and that that new pet owner doesn't feel that they're isolated and on their own as challenges may come up. And we found that while most new pet parents are quite excited, there's also a lot of anxiety that may bubble up. And we saw that in the report, particularly in the younger generations that were surveyed. And some of the things that they concerned about or may come up as issues when people are thinking of relinquishing a pet are again around financial and just again that overall cost of pet ownership, as well as training or behavioral issues. And so first, I think behavioral issues do remain one of the top concerns that we're seeing. And so that is an area of opportunity where if those resources are available through the shelter, to make sure that that information is shared with the pet owner at the time of adoption so that they know that they can reach back out or potentially as a conduit for information of other services that might exist within the community. And one thing that we found is our report showed that among the American respondents who received support or resources when they were considering surrendering their pet, 95% of them ultimately elected to keep that pet. It shows that when we work together as an industry in the animal health community to provide those post-adoption resources, we can significantly reduce returns to the shelter and we can help keep people and their pets together. And so we have a huge opportunity to provide that support. And when we think about it from a access to care standpoint, lots of shelters are doing work around mobile clinics and vaccine drives and subsidized care. And these are all things that can make a huge difference when we want to show up and keep those pets and their people together long term.
Very cool. So you brought the point that we're seeing shelters getting full again. In Dallas, I saw it where I live. They capped it. They said, hey, we don't have any more space. And I think every year Hills supports the Clear the Shelters campaign. Do you see the capacity of a shelter getting full and then waning down? Is it sort of a wave? Where do you guys see that in the historic data?
When we look at 2024, we know that 5.8 million pets entered rescues and shelters, and that it was the fifth consecutive year that intakes outpaced outcomes. But when we kind of step back and look at what the overall trend is, that is down about 1% from 2023, and it's down 11% from 2019, but there were still 103,000 pets added to shelters in 2024 that did not find new homes. And so that there is still that critical capacity issue, and I think that's where the foster programs, there are lots of shelters across the US that are doing really creative and innovative ways to create more capacity. And I think fostering right is a really important mechanism to do that. But there's a really big opportunity around awareness. We saw in the younger generation who was surveyed that 1 in 5 were not aware of the shelter in their community. And so while there is a propensity, we know that 63% of Americans would likely choose a shelter. I think that there's a really big education piece there. And when we get folks into the shelter environment who adopt, they largely have really positive outcomes. And so they're like 80% more likely to come back and adopt again. So there's this really big need to get folks into that community, adopting pets. And I think that's where we can make a really big impact from that capacity basis standpoint.
That's spectacular. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. We're going to make sure that we link the full report. If you haven't dove into it, jump in, dig through the full report, get the full insights. But for people that want to learn more, where should they go to get hands on the report and learn more about what Hills is doing?
There's so much great information in this report, and we really hope that it helps everyone see some of these hurdles more clearly. And it gives us the data to collaborate as a community and help close these gaps so we can improve the outcomes for more people to find these pets and for more pets to find loving homes. And so if you are interested in digging in, you can head to hillsshelterreport.com where you'll be able to download the report and dive into all of those wonderful insights.
Well, Dr. Esty, thank you again. Thank you to Hills for doing this report and sharing the time with us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Big changes are rocking PetMed Express. Last week, both CEO Sandra Campos and CFO Robin D'Elia abruptly resigned a little over a year after Campos had originally stepped into the role. Their departures weren't staggered or gradual. They left on the very same day last week. In the meantime, board chair Leslie Campbell has taken over as the interim CEO, while the chief accounting officer Douglas Krulik is now serving as interim financial chief, and the board has been reshuffled as both of those leaders are no longer part of that board. The company hasn't given any specific reasons for the resignation, but the timing is hard to ignore. PetMeds has delayed their year-end financials twice this summer, citing an internal audit committee investigation. The probe that they're doing with this audit is focused on how revenue from auto-ship subscription orders was recognized in the fourth quarter, as well as the impact of a $50 coupon campaign on new customer metrics. There have also been complaints about the company's control environment and culture. The news has not been great for their share price as well. The stock dropped nearly 30% after the resignations and filing delays, and there have been some law firms that have already announced securities fraud investigations on behalf of shareholders. It's been a rough road for leadership at PetMed Express for quite a while. Campos, as we said, only took the reins in April of 2024 after the departure of Matt Hewlett, who himself had been in the role for less than 3 years after taking over from longtime CEO Menderes Actag. Another change just 1 year later is giving a lot of investors and employees wondering where this company is headed. For now, PetMed Express is searching for permanent replacements, but the pressure is on for the interim team to restore stability and rebuild confidence at this very difficult moment. Another company that might be eyeing that public markets is NVA. National Veterinary Associations has announced a welcoming of a new board director. Brian McKeon is very well versed in taking part and participating alongside publicly traded companies. He served for over a decade as the CFO and treasurer of IDEX, which, as many and all of you know, is an S&P 500 company. And he was most recently IDEX's executive vice president and special advisor. What I found most interesting in the release about this was the first sentence in the press release that NVA put out said, McKeon brings a wealth of expertise in financing and strategic planning, having held leadership roles at multiple publicly traded corporations. Now, it's been a while since we've heard the chatter around an NVA Ethos IPO and what all of that means. But if you do remember, in May, NVA announced more new board member appointments with Ken Burdick as the executive chairman and Mike McFarland as a director. In that press release, they said these executives bring substantial healthcare and public company experience ahead of the company's future IPO. So one to definitely keep our eyes open for. I think there's a lot that's going to be happening, but the public markets are always an interesting one to see where people take things. Finally, a story that wraps into an event that I'm going to be going to at the end of this week and early next week. Plug and Play Topeka has selected their new cohort of 13 animal health startups for their accelerator program. In collaboration with Go Topeka, which is part of the Economic Development Center for Kansas's capital city, Plug and Play Topeka has selected 13 companies to take part in their 9th cohort. I had the opportunity to go and visit the Plug and Play offices in Silicon Valley and have been wowed by their selection of incredible companies. The program's newest cohort here has a really broad and global reach. They have companies that are across 6 different countries: US, Turkey, Sweden, Singapore, China, and Germany. And these companies are going to take part in an 18-week program that'll include pitch opportunities, mentorship, corporate entity introductions, a series of business development workshops, as well as a lot of collaboration between them. The 13 companies, and I'm going to roll through these real quick, but make sure to link them, are Pointer Health, Treat, Green On, Petalife, Vetabolics, Brandvine, Pet Portal AI, Chemcode, Humanly, Test Blue Diagnostics, Artera Pet Science, N&E Innovations, and RSLNT, which they may say resilient, but it's all capital letters, and that's what I'm giving you. So the thing that was really interesting and ties this in, if you're going to be in Kansas City for the upcoming KC Animal Health Corridor Summit this next week, is obviously Topeka is centrally located, set right there in the animal health corridor. It's the largest concentration of animal health companies and related industries. There's 300 animal health companies between Manhattan, Kansas, and Columbia, Missouri. 4 of the top 10 animal health companies in the world are part of that. They generate 56% of the total animal health diagnostic and pet foods sold globally. And there's $21.5 billion of sales amongst the animal health companies in the corridor. So next week is the summit. I'm really looking forward to being up there, being on stage, and having a great conversation with some people around technology. So if you're going to be in Kansas City next week, be sure to stop by. I'm going to hit on some of the key things that are going on at the summit in next week's episode. And for more on these and other stories, join us by subscribing to our Substack. There's a link in the bio. And don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing and rating the show. For the Bird Bath, I'm Ryan Leach. See you next week.